Hi, my name is Jennifer Russell, co-founder of Evolving Love, and I'm here to talk to you today about the 3 myths of conflict and why it might be true that you're fighting more than you need to. And one of the reasons we are creating this is that we notice that many couples get into conflict, and there's some really commonplace ideas and beliefs about both what the conflict is and what its cause is, and what's going on between you. And we just want to get under the hood of some of those commonplace views and see if there's a few misguided understandings or beliefs that might be adding to why those conflicts are happening. So let's dive in. Myth number 1: if your partner would just change, it would all be better. So often we get hurt in our relationships, and what it feels like is happening is if they would just be a little bit different, if they would just change that one thing, that it would all get resolved. And we're often really confused about the root causes of our conflicts. And sometimes we point to what's out there that feels like the very source of our pain. So how do we know that that is really not what's going on? You know, if you're just more than just even a little bit frustrated or annoyed with the situation, it's an indicator that your blind spots are at play, in addition to your partner's likely. And the sad truth is that even if your partner would change in exactly the way that you hoped, the conflict would find a way to persist because the blind spots that are actually the cause haven't been looked at. And when we're triggered and we imagine that the source of the pain is outside of ourselves, we're usually missing what actually needs to shift and change for it to permanently take care of the pattern. So let's give you an example of this in action. So let's say you're in a relationship and you're feeling a little insecure in the relationship. You're feeling like you're unclear how much your partner is really in it and committed. And maybe they don't feel as committed as you. And you're feeling like a little bit of nervousness about your self-esteem. Like, am I good enough for them? Are they going to stick around? Are they going to leave me? And so you get into a conflict and you ask your partner, gosh, can't you just tell me I love you more? Or can't you just text me every day? Or can't you just do X, Y, and Z? Fill in the blank that you ask them to do. Now, they may do that for you. And that might actually, for a short term, feel pretty good. And you're imagining it's them and their behavior that is eliciting and creating the lack of self-esteem and the anxiety in you. Now, if you go down that path and that's how you resolve your conflict in that moment, even if there's a short-term gain in how you're feeling, what tends to happen 9 times out of 10 is that they do that behavior, but your anxiety, since it resides in you, that lack of self-esteem, that self-doubt was never actually looked at, that it will find something else to get insecure about, something else to have self-doubt about, something else that your partner might do or that you might experience that has you question the relationship. And if you never look here, if you never look at the fact that the dynamic is actually co-created and are willing to go first and make the change yourself that will actually unwind it at its root, so that you can capture the evolutionary potential locked in every conflict, then you'll find yourself repeating that conflict again and again. So that's the first myth, is that if your partner would just change, it would all be better. So now let's look at myth number 2. And that one is forgiving your partner is letting them off the hook, right? So it only feels safe for many to fully forgive someone if you absolutely know for sure that they'll never hurt you again, right? And if you suspect that they might, then it's a natural impulse that many of us have to withhold that forgiveness and even withhold love until you get some of the evidence that you want to be sure that they won't do it again. Now, this feels like a safe way to protect yourself. It feels like you're standing for being treated in the way that you think you and maybe all people deserve. And so holding on to this idea that you don't forgive until you've built the trust in order to award them that forgiveness until they've earned that forgiveness can feel like you're standing for a positive relationship. But really, what's happening is that forgiveness is actually an important part of the healing process for yourself and your partner, right? So, we can never be truly sure about the future. And it's a part of your mental health and your contribution to positive future to actually be the one to lead with forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is to be granted and not earned. Because there's something important, and I want you to remember this, which is that forgiveness is the way that we make sure that we don't carry the wounds of the past into our own future and recreate them in our future. Because often what happens is that we take something that happened in our past and we are afraid that it's going to continue to happen. And therefore we blur it, we spread it out into our future, and then are walking around as if that future is happening, and therefore are creating a sense of trauma and pain for us for events that haven't even happened yet. Now, when we forgive, it sort of unhooks that whole pattern, right? And so without forgiveness, our partners have very little chance of showing up in that future the way that that we would want them to, because we're already making the assumptions of how it's going to go. And it's amazing the power of our intentions, because what we intend tends to be what persists, right? And so if you intend and expect things to go badly, and you can't forgive because of that, then it's more likely that they'll feel not believed in. And in that feeling of not being believed in, it creates their own sense of dysregulation, their own sense of not being enough. And that creates more of the very conflict, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you forgive someone, and this is really what we want, is instead of withholding forgiveness, what would happen if you would lead forgiveness before you think they've earned it? And because if you forgive someone, you start seeing them way more clearly. You start seeing their humanity. You start seeing their beauty. You start seeing their limitations. You see them exactly for how they are. When we're triggered, we see only a very small slice of who they are, and we sort of put on blinders on because we're triggered enough that we're closing our perspective to only see a very small piece of them that we think is all of them in that moment. And when we forgive, we take off those blinders and we see the whole picture, their limits, their failures, their successes, their triumphs, their truth, their beauty, their fallacies, their everything. We see it all. And so when you forgive someone, you stop doing what's so common in relationship, when you try to force them into becoming this ideal that you've made up in your mind, and then punish them for not living into that ideal by withholding your forgiveness and your love sometimes for not living into that self-image that you held in your mind. And that image in our minds that we're unhappy about, it tends to be built from our own insecurities and has nothing to do with who they actually are. And it's the kind of image we build in order to create kind of our own sense of safety, that we're going to be okay in a relationship. So we want them to act or behave in a way that won't trespass on some of those fears. So from this place of seeing them as they truly are, you can actually begin to make healthy choices, right? And from there, what we're not saying is, you forgive and then forget and then decide that you're in a codependent relationship where you're in something that isn't right for you, isn't healthy for you. But what we are saying is that you actually forgive, and then from that forgiveness, see what's really going on clearly. And then from there, make the healthy choice. Is this good for me? Is this not good for me? Right? So let's do myth number 3. So myth number 3 is that you and your partner created the problem, right? So this seems obvious, like, well, of course we did. If we're the ones in the middle of the problem, that in the conflict, that we of course must have created it. So since fights with loved ones seem so personal, the most personal of all of our experience, seems as though each couple creates the situation themselves by themselves. It follows then that every couple should be able to resolve their conflicts on their own without outside help. But really, when you look at why we're actually fighting, not just what we're fighting about or who we're fighting with, but look at why underneath the root cause, you can start to see that we're all having basically the same exact fights. There are only about a handful of conflicts. And generation after generation after generation, we're actually just recreating the same conflicts and playing a really predictable part where we get into a conflict. And because it's a conflict, we're actually polarizing each other into a particular position that creates a very predictable response. It's closer to the truth to say that the fights are having us than we are having them. Age-old conflicts that have been going on generation after generation are conscripting us, right? Like unwilling soldiers in a war that we don't even fully understand. And it might be possible in this metaphor for an individual soldier to end the war, but it's more compassionate to see that we need help to fully understand the conflicts that overtake us and to learn what each of us can do that will fully protect the values that are most important to us peacefully and beautifully. So it's more true that there's these energetics that we're sort of gravitationally and magnetically being pulled into, both by how our partner's responding and by how our own patterns and how we're responding. And that those energetics are playing themselves out again and again in our relationships. So as an example, really basic conflict is the complaint defense cycle. And it's a toxic cycle because the more that you complain, very, very naturally, it's really hard not to do this. The more that you defend, and then the more that you defend, the more that your partner complains and vice versa. And it ends up getting you in this toxic cycle that just continues. And there's this gravity that pulls you into that toxic cycle such that each one creates more of the other. And then you're really in this division of separation and it really is a conflict that feels like it's hard to get out of. Now, those energetics we're recreating all the time. They're not unique. And there's basically a finite set. And in Brian and I's work, we've got really a set of 8 of these dimensions that create conflict that are basically at the core of what's at the center of every single conflict that we're having. And what we're seeing are these basically 8 that arrange themselves into these polarities. So it's not so much that we're creating the fight, it's that we're being conscripted into the vortex of an energetic that is actually creating a dynamic that has us at war and feeling like we're on opposite sides. So what do we do with that, right? Well, we get help from those outside of the conflict, right? That have successfully unwound it, right? So you want to get perspectives other than yours, because when you're in one of those and you're in that dynamic, if whether it's complaint defense, or another one would be control collapse, another one is anxious avoidant, right? Another one might be addiction and codependence. These form these polarizing toxic cycles where the more one of you does one, the more he does the other. And you can't really see or find your way out of that because you're too far inside of it. So the idea here is that realize that as personal as it feels, it's not individual to you. It's not unique to you. And you want to really use what many societies have actually figured out, the Bushmen and the Sami tribes, who have a reputation of being perhaps the most peaceful culture on earth. What they do is they create a third side, right? There's the 2 people in the conflict, but then there's the surrounding community that's around them that can help resolve the conflict and help bring clarity, understanding, and support. There's a common story that gets said where, you get asked, well, if there's 2 people in a bar and there's about a fight about to be started, who starts the fight? And the answer is not one or the other of the 2 people that you might think, but it's that third person. It's that third side. Because what happens is, one side is getting escalating, the other side is matching that escalation, and then the friends of that one party on that side might start to join in, and the friends of the other side might start to join in, and they might actually egg it on or add energy and start to stir it up and escalate things even more. But when you have an outsider that's not part of that dynamic come in and either say, hey guys, relax, let's calm it down here, or hey, he's wrong, you should get him, right? That third side that's outside the system that comes in energetically to add a perspective is often what tips people over the edge, right? Because in a more beautiful sense, the third side is that surrounding community, which serves as a container for an escalating conflict. And in the absence of that container, serious conflict between two parties all too easily turns into destructive strife, right? And so the idea is that you bring that bigger understanding, that wider perspective that you get from someone that isn't in the dynamic, that even them witnessing you and your conflict brings a perspective that has you each even step out of yourselves long enough to hold the multiplicity and the complexity of multiple perspectives at once. And so that you can see the whole dynamic as a bird's eye view rather than as a rat's eye view being stuck in it. So it's incredibly important that when we're in these conflicts, that we have that third side and we have the right support that can have you feel bigger than your issue and that can help you restore the feelings of love, of passion, and of commitment. That's the reason you got into the relationship in the first place. So those are our three myths. And as just as a generous offer that I want to extend, because I love helping people evolve the way that they love and rewrite these patterns, is I want to offer those of you listening a complimentary consultation session with me so that we can really look at some of the dynamics that might be at play in your relationships, whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship. I recommend a session like this to really do the depth of work that you need to do to really look at and rewrite the patterns that might be creating the conflict. That if you had some more perspective, that if you had that third side, you might actually unwind it and really release it permanently. So I'd love to offer those sessions to those of you that are inspired to take me up on it. And basically, it's a quick 30-minute session where we'll take a look at what the pattern is that you might want to look at, help you align your love life, help you bring it and make it from an ordinary to an extraordinary relationship in any way that it isn't already. And I'll work with you and see what it might take in us working together to gain a deeper understanding of those relational dynamics that are at play in your relationships and help give you some pointers along the way to unwind those patterns. And we'll in this short consultation session just start to open the door a little bit just to get a feel for those dynamics. And then you get to decide whether you want to take that any further. But I'd love to give you that session absolutely free of charge. All you have to do is commit to show up and to tell me a little bit about what it is that you want to take a look at. And I'll be happy to be in deep service to you. So if you want to do that, go ahead and click the apply for your session down below, and we'll get something on the calendar and spend a little time on it. This is Jennifer Russell, deeply in your service. Thank you.